Hey everyone, I just want to start by saying that without you, Dear Family would be nothing. I'm truly touched by all the messages I've been receiving of encouragement. I want to acknowledge and thank my awesome listeners who have already written a glowing review for Dear Family. A special shout out goes to @Stacy Carr, @Mia Mama, @Rabbi Hillel Cohn, @Fletchy's Mama, @Schneid, and @David Don Miller. Their 5-star reviews go a long way in helping me reach a bigger audience, but I need some more. So if you write Dear Family a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, I will happily give you a shout out in the next podcast. Happy listening and thanks again.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. Dear Family will explore many angles of mental illness, including isolation, drug addiction, and even suicide. Sounds like fun, huh? Well, you'd be surprised, actually. Because once we get so invested with Rachel's guests, we can actually relate to many of the issues that naturally arise during her conversations. And what often follows is a knowing laughter. So yes, expect tears of heartfelt empathy, but don't be surprised if you chuckle now and then. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Jessica Goldklang has a real zest for life. She gets a lot of joy by gathering with people for meals, which is why she's the perfect special event planner. But when she was 13 years old, she had her first panic attack. The room began to spin, and she felt like she was going to be sick. Nobody discussed panic attacks 30 years ago, so she believed there was something wrong with her, which only increased her anxiety. During high school, she continued to strive for perfection so that she could fight that out-of-control feeling. She became a model student in college, but she ended up shocking herself by falling in love with a woman. She never dared tell anyone out of shame, because then no one talked about it. She had no role models that she could see that looked like her, and so she just repressed her feelings. She continued wearing her costume and was that put-together girl with the pearls who wore dresses and party shoes. She was determined to live that white picket fence American dream. While she was assisting prominent Hollywood studio executives, they asked her to plan their children's birthday parties. She decided to cater the events herself and earned her self-taught cooking and baking abilities a legendary reputation. There she was, with a picture-perfect life to the outside world, a home on the hill, a kind and successful husband, 2 healthy daughters, pets, and even an artist studio. But what she kept hidden was her postpartum depression and her paralyzing anxiety. But in 2016, her life completely changed. Without even searching, she met a woman and fell in love. Jessica had to make the difficult and painful decision to undo her life. She made sure to give her 100% to her teenage daughters, and she threw herself into her business, Party Crush Events, with clients like Lululemon, ABC, Warner Brothers, and Schwinn. And although she's still seeking therapy for her anxiety, since acknowledging her authentic self, her panic attacks have subsided. She's now able to fully celebrate by expressing her rainbow-colored boldness. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, honey. I'm so happy you're here. So we first met a dozen or so years ago when our kids were toddlers and they were attending the same preschool. And now that our kids are full-blown teenagers, we definitely have even more to talk about. But I want the listeners to know what an incredible visual storyteller you are. I've absolutely fallen in love with your Instagram stories, and you can just tell how much you love your life and your family and your job. And I love how you pick new topics daily, and you just kind of have this incredible, amazing eye for color. And you blend it with your sense of humor, and it's often interspersed with cute animal images and playful history lessons. So it's a lot of fun to come along for the ride as you party plan or you discover new cafes and cute boutiques on your travels. And we'll talk about your Instagram account at the end in the show notes. But you came to mind as a guest because I will never forget the very brave and open public letter you wrote. on Facebook. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that public letter.
Wow. Well, that's digging right into the heart of the story.
Yes. And we'll go back. We've got so many questions here, but yes.
Starting with the end. I think it's taken me a long time to acknowledge my authentic self and who I was and who I am. And I spent the majority of my life trying to be what everybody else wanted me to be, what I thought society wanted me to be, what I thought I needed to be in order to achieve happiness. And I would say nearly 3 years ago, by circumstance, which is a story in itself, came to terms with the fact that I am gay and that although it doesn't fit into the ideal of the American dream or what's supposed to be the ideal, it's really me. And ever since I came to terms with that and became public about it, which was one of the scariest things I've ever had to do, I've been enjoying life in a different light. There was a lot of pain that went with it, but I think my motto is that I lead in love and light. With everything that I do, I wake up with gratitude for what I have, big or small, every day. And I'm just following this adventure.
Well, I have to say, for somebody, we're going to talk about your anxiety next, but for somebody that suffers from anxiety, what you did was so incredibly brave and just took so much guts to just come out and say, like, here I am, this is me, take me or leave me. And I just admired that so much. And I just want you to know that it really touched me. And I'm sure it touched a lot of others because there's nothing like authenticity, right? We all really, just appreciate that.
I was surprised because I really believe that the perfect woman that I was putting out to the world is what people would like me for. But it turns out that being a messy, authentic, true to yourself person is much more likable.
100%. And that really goes to my next question because, you talk about how you always wanted to kind of have this control, whether it was like reinventing yourself when you moved to high school or this persona that you became, like this party planner who, was like a young Martha Stewart wearing pearls and always with your white apron and just looking so put together and cute. But, your first episode happened when you were young, right? You mentioned that it happened after your parents declared bankruptcy and got divorced and your family lost everything. Can you tell us about your first panic attack and when you were able to call it by its name, anxiety?
Back in, I want to say a few decades ago, so I don't date myself exactly. Nobody knew what panic attacks were, what anxiety disorder was. So there wasn't a name that went to it. I was in New York City. I was with my dad and my stepmom, who I love very much. And I was in a restaurant and all of a sudden the room started to spin. I felt like I had gone off my axis and I was just sideways. And I kind of put that together with the feeling of maybe being nauseous or having to get sick because I felt so out of control of what was going on around me. So I made my way to the bathroom. And, when people ask me what an anxiety attack feels like, what a panic attack feels like, I like to explain it as if you pretend you're walking down the street, like a busy street, and the walking sign comes on and you see that and you feel safe and you start walking across the street and a car comes zooming towards you and then puts on its brakes because they don't realize that it's the red light and they come very close to hitting you. That's kind of what a panic attack feels like. It's like a fight or a flight feeling in which you want to run, your heart races, your mouth gets dry, sometimes your arm get a little tingly and numb, at least that's how it is for me, and you feel, dizzy with anxiety. That was the kind of feeling that I remember I had, and it was so foreign, and I felt shame immediately around it. But for someone who has anxiety, control is the ultimate. You want to be in control. So when your body does something different, it's just a feeling of helplessness because you can't control it. You can't rein it back in.
Well, and I know that, often anxiety goes hand in hand with depression because then you start feeling bad about yourself. Did you ever suffer from depression?
I'm not a depressive personality.
You definitely don't seem it.
No, the only depression I had was postpartum depression. And as we go through my journey of how I got better, I'll explain to you how that played in. But, the psychiatrist that I check in every few months to manage my medication and to just check in and make sure I'm doing okay right now told me that anxiety can be a primary, but there's also a shadow diagnosis. So it never stands on its own. A lot of people have OCD when they have anxiety disorder. I wouldn't diagnose myself with that. Like, I don't feel like I have that, or I would say I have that. But for people who have anxiety disorder, I can definitely relate to wanting everything to be the way that I need it to be in order to feel safe. I used to be like that. So I need to be in bed at a certain time. I need to have a glass.
So it's order and control, right?
Yeah.
That you think is going to help quell any anxiety.
Exactly.
Which you can see being on that border of OCD.
Yeah. I mean, in my worst of worst moments with my anxiety, I had painted myself into a corner of what my needs were in order to be okay. But the secret is really just letting go.
Right.
But that's
hard to do.
Yeah. The more you fight it, the worse it becomes.
Well, so, this podcast is called Dear Family, and I don't think that anyone is an island. And I know a little bit about your history, about how you grew up in Portland, that you were the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. Do you think that your anxiety could have been passed down?
I definitely believe that there's a genetic component to anxiety. It has run through my family, my grandfather, whether it began in the Holocaust or not. My mother has definitely had some experience with it, myself and one of my daughters. So I believe there is a genetic component. The amazing news is that we are so much more aware.
Absolutely.
So what my grandfather dealt with, what my mother dealt with, even what I dealt with, people now who have anxiety disorder have a wealth of information and have, compassion from people and understanding and tools to deal with it. So it's not this weird unknown.
Absolutely. I think just being able to label it, whereas when you were 13, you didn't know what was happening, which only just spiraled into more anxiety, just kind of understanding, oh, this is happening to me right now. This is why I'm reacting this way, is because I'm feeling this attack coming on, and this is what I can do. But back to the, your grandfather being a Holocaust survivor, I find it so interesting, all these new studies about epigenetics, which actually talks about how past traumas can change our DNA. And, it's a fascinating thing to think about that, the traumas that your grandfather went through, likely whether it was environment or biology, changed, your mom, which could have changed you.
How could it not?
Right, exactly.
We're just so much more open to talking now. I can't stress that enough, that we can work through it. Not only, sometimes you go at anxiety disorder with talk therapy, and sometimes there are different ways to go at it. But just being able to have this frank discussion that we're having now, there was so much shame and taboo around having something different, having the anxiety, that it was nothing that I could have an open discussion about. It was one of my deepest, most shameful secrets when I was growing up, is that I had something wrong with me.
Wow. I mean, that is a huge aspect of this podcast, and why I'm so grateful is that you're talking about it. It is to kind of rid that shame and find compassion and understanding, because look, it's a silent thing. People don't necessarily know. You could have a smile on your face and be panicking, right?
That thing is, people expect to see some spectacle if someone's having a panic attack. And it's such an internal, quiet pain that even when you talk about it greatly, most people don't want to draw attention to themselves because they are thinking the whole room is looking at them already.
That's really amazing and interesting that, So I have a question. You were around 13 when you first noticed this panic attack, and it came around a time that your life was a little bit in turmoil. Were you also maybe like aware of your sexuality? Did that play into it at all, or no?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
The stability of my family, and also like, we talked about probably some genetics and also some hormones.
Of course. Oh, God.
At that age.
We've got teenagers. Yep.
Yeah. At that age in adolescence, things are developing and forming. And I really think it was just circumstantial. I don't think it had anything to do with that. I was so suppressed for so long that it was more about the loss of control of maybe my environment around me. I had moved from Oregon to California, and I think that was really difficult. It was just a difficult time. So not having the control over that made me feel out of control, which in turn caused the anxiety.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of environment and what we were talking about, whether it's genetics or not, I know that you talk about how greatly fashion conscious your grandmother was and that she always wore full makeup and Chanel sunglasses. And I've seen pictures of her. She was fabulous.
Yes.
Do you think that you inherited their style?
Oh, gosh. I'm not as stylish as my mom and my grandma, but
isn't that so
there
cute?
Was an emphasis. I don't want to make it out to be like it was this vapid thing. But, they like to put themselves together. They like to take care of themselves. And that was definitely something that we saw in our family, my sister and I growing up. But I think that my mom runs so much deeper than that. One thing I just recently spoke about on social media about her is despite all of the anxiety and the turmoil and the pain that my mom has gone through in her life, she has this incredible love of life and this joy that she finds, whether it's looking at trees or, seeing how blue the sky is, or looking at a dog or seeing two people laughing together. She always finds the joy. And I think more importantly than teaching me, how to put myself together and look right, passing me down that attribute of finding joy in life is the most important thing that she could have given me.
Well, you'll be happy to know that how you just described your mom is how I would describe you. Honestly, so you definitely got that from your mom. There's no denying.
I love that. I think life is just so full of wonder, and there's so many little things we can look at and celebrate. So despite the turmoil that I've been through too, I will never stop looking for that joy. It's just too good.
Yeah, well, you have that kind of eternal optimism about you, You can see it even in your visual storytelling, just the way you look at things. So it's very happy and wonderful, and keep it up, and your mom should be proud.
Thank you. And I will say that as a person who has anxiety, my particular flavor of it is that it doesn't keep me down. And this is why I know I don't have depression, is it doesn't keep me down for a long time. That's just who I am. If I am suffering, it will be a short period, and then I'll pop back up. So I never go too low for too long. And that's just the way mine works. But I will, have my moments, definitely. And
well, I know you mentioned you've gone to cognitive behavioral therapy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I was a teenager, my parents did the best that they could for me. However, like we said, there wasn't a lot of information. There wasn't the knowledge. There weren't the studies on anxiety. So it was just kind of shooting in the dark with talk therapy. When I was in my 20s, I moved to New York City after I went to college. And New York, that place can kick your ass. It is my favorite city in the world still. I love it. I'm there once a year. I am totally creatively fueled by it. Living in New York City at 23 years old and trying to make ends meet was just absolutely too much for my constitution. And it probably gave me the worst stretch of anxiety that I've ever had in my life. So I moved back to Los Angeles to be with my fiance at the time, and I couldn't function as well as I wanted to. I wouldn't be able to go into cars with other people, or if I walked into a room, I would always be looking for an exit. I knew that I wasn't healthy. So I looked up at UCLA. They had a program for anxiety disorder, which was cognitive behavioral therapy. And I marched myself to UCLA and found a doctor named David Plotkin, who's still in practice. And he worked with me, I would probably 2.5 years. And the difference in between cognitive behavioral therapy and talk therapy is instead of coming in and having him say, "How was your week?" He would come in and say, "Let's talk about the physiology of your body, what's going on chemically in your body, why you're having these reactions." So it's a very literal way of understanding what was going on in my physical body, and that I didn't have to take such ownership mentally over it, that there was something wired funny in me. So I could forgive myself a little bit and try to go at it from that perspective to fix things.
Also give you, speaking of tools, just the kind of knowledge to understand, my body is reacting this way now because of whatever it was you were experiencing, which might also help you gain a little more control, right? And feel...
It's like a crash course in what anxiety disorder is and what happens in your body. Now it's a very popular therapy that people use all the time. And, David's amazing. He's still in practice helping people. But I was determined not to take antidepressants because I felt like at that time there was still a stigma with it. So I did everything that I could in my power, and I tend to throw myself into things 100%, to not have to take medicine, but to remedy myself through therapy. And I did.
You'll have to listen to Mikkel Bond's episode too. He talks all about his panic attacks and how he was able to get through it without medication.
So what happened is I was so proud of myself for not having to do the medication and, at that time in my life and feeling really like I was on top of the world. And then I got pregnant and I had my daughter and I had postpartum depression, which was totally out of my control again. But
did you know you had you were able to name it at the time?
My mom was staying with me and I could not get out of bed and I could not stop crying. And it was nothing like a depressive personality, but this was like, what has happened to my body? And I had an emergency C-section, and they say that oftentimes if you do an emergency C-section, you're prone to it because you're not mentally prepared.
Right.
You're like, oh, I'm due next week, or I have a scheduled C-section. It was like, oh my gosh, the baby's in danger. Let's go in. It just triggers that. So my obstetrician, my mom dragged me in. She's like, there's something wrong with her. And my OB looked at me and he said, you don't have a choice. You have to take medication. You have to take care of a baby. This is not about you.
Right. And now speaking of, ridding shame and stigma, it's so much more common than we ever even thought. It's a combination of our hormones. It's a combination of being sleep deprived. It's just a combination of everything, right? So
it's so common. And fortunately, there have been people that have spoken out about it to shed light on it. And again, the more people talk about things, less people feel alone. And that's why I want to talk to you. And, so at that point, when my doctor said, you have to take these pills, I didn't have the luxury to say, no, I want to, my way. So I took the pills and was better within 10 days. And then from then on, I thought, this kind of works for the anxiety too. I might as well stay on. So I have been on and off Lexapro for a long time, which is fine.
And did you have postpartum with your second daughter?
I did not. I was so prepared.
You did not. See, and that in of itself just shows the knowledge of, understanding what you could be up against, and you're able to not deal with it.
Right. And so much of this, again, is the shame. I have a healthy baby. I'm home. I have a beautiful nursery for her. We expected her. Everything's great. Why am I feeling so depressed? So to take those feelings out of it and just tell people that sometimes your body reacts without being connected to your brain. It doesn't have to make sense. your body just goes and does things chemically or mentally to you that, you can get support for and get through. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person or you're lesser than. It's just.
No, I really appreciate you saying that, because I think, somebody on the outside could have looked at you and been like, what's your problem, Jessica? You have everything you could want. Why are you feeling this way? And to kind of point out that this really was out of your control. This was not something that, you wanted or wished upon yourself. This was something that you had to deal with.
That's exactly what coming out was for me too.
Right. Well, okay. So, how did you come out to your husband, and how did your daughters handle the news?
I'm going to be careful here because it's so fresh, and I want to be so respectful because I absolutely adore my ex and want to, give my girls privacy about this. But I will just tell you that I was honest from day one. And I think
always the best policy.
And being honest and having open conversations was crucial in how things played out. Because when you have those hard conversations and you truly humble yourself, on my knees saying, I am in trouble. I don't even know what's happening here. And he is the most amazing guy, just a stand-up, good-hearted, amazing father, and I was very fortunate in that way too. But honesty,
yeah. Again, this all comes back to authenticity, right? Like, you can't deny somebody's true self, right?
Well, I tried for a long time.
Yeah.
I tried because I thought that would bring me happiness. And, happiness is a big question that I grappled with going through this transition and this journey. I remember asking my mom, is there only one way to be happy? Is being happy only having the white picket fence and, the husband and the daughters? Like, will I ever find happiness again? Because I don't know that I will. And I have been turned so upside down in my life that I understand that it's not happiness. And my sister-in-law, who's also one of my best friends, who I love as well, has taught me this too. Happiness is not some big consistent blanket that you are covered in. Happiness is in moments. Happiness is in family and activities. And there are some days, and happiness could be in the blue sky, just like my mom said. But you have to put yourself in that mindset.
But Jessica, you said you unraveled the life that you once had, this like perfect home and everything that just kind of seemed that quote unquote American dream. You were so worried to let it unravel because you thought you'd be unhappy. And yet, look at you now, right?
I don't want to underplay the journey that I went through. There were times where I wanted to quite literally rip off the skin that I was in, because no mother wants to cause pain to her children.
Right.
And, I hurt my kids and they're fine now, but I changed their story and no one wants to do that. I mean, I love girls more than anything in the entire world. And I didn't want to hurt my husband. He never did anything to deserve this, So it was so painful and so raw and so vulnerable. And every day, I had to just keep going. I mean, there was something within me that was like a freight train. And without that energy, without that feeling, there was some knowing in me that knew that I was going the right direction, even though it felt against everything I believed.
Isn't that interesting? It was kind of like you had a North Star that you kind of, your intuition just drove you towards.
It was the knowing. I was so incredibly suppressed that when the knowing came, there was no turning back from that, because it was like, oh my gosh, there you are.
Well, so you fell in love with a woman when you were in college, and it really surprised you. And you didn't tell anybody. You kind of repressed it because you were known as this girl with the pearls, and it just didn't fit in your model of who you were and maybe where you came from and where you were going. And then in 2016, you fell in love with another woman. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Amazingly, if I had to tell you that there were two things that I was ashamed of, it was that and it was my anxiety. Those were my deepest, darkest secrets. And I pushed that down so hard, it just did not fit in with what I wanted to be. Like I said, today you can see two moms having families. You can see two moms living together and having a normal suburban life. But I didn't have those models back then. I was also going to school in a small town in Illinois where there were probably a ton of gay people at the school, but there were maybe a handful that were out because we're talking about the early 90s. So there was no like Rainbow Alliance, like my daughters go to a school now, where it's just like the rainbow flags are out and the, pink and blue.
Yeah. And even if you're not gay, you join the gay club. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's who you are because you support anyone and who they love. And love is love. And
absolutely.
And all the major retailers during Pride Month. So it's just so different now. So back then I was really ashamed and I tucked it away and moved on with my life. And those feelings were so strong back then that they frightened me. When I met the woman that I met, who is still my girlfriend after, coming up on 3 years soon, I had a physical reaction before I had a mental knowing, which is so strange. And I would be around her and my body would feel different and I couldn't identify it. And it was confusing to me. And I was so suppressed. I had no idea what it was. And I spoke to a friend of mine in Colorado who felt safe. And I said, I don't know what's happening to me. And she said, maybe you have feelings for her. And that was the beginning of the knowing. And then it just roared, like a fire getting bigger. And all of these things came up. And even being with my girlfriend in the first part of our relationship, I started remembering things in my life that could have been indicators to my sexuality that I had buried down so deep out of shame.
Like what?
Maybe crushes of girls in high school.
Right.
Looking at women who were together as couples and wondering if it should be me, taking a particular interest in certain women who were gay, being overly interested in them, like just simple things like that I just kept to myself, but were very obvious if you put all these pieces together. But I was just so ashamed. Ironically, the woman from college lives in LA, and I reached out to her to tell her. And she was so gracious and wonderful, and we've become friends again. So,
I love that.
So full circle.
That's
she's
amazing.
Back in my life. I got to talk through how ashamed I was and how I left her and why I wasn't able to step up. In essence, she gave me that. Just let it go. It was what it was. She was so amazing and she's such a pivotal person in my life. And I'm very grateful to have her in my life now. So it's like everything became healed, in that sense as well. During the whole process of like when I said I wanted to just crawl out of my skin or run down the street, like I couldn't handle myself, I never had anxiety attacks. I mean, I still struggle, like sometimes because of my medication, I can never hit that level of full-blown anxiety. And I also have the tools and the knowledge of years of experience. So my biggest advice is, lean into it, lean in. When there's discomfort, you have to lean into that discomfort. So if I feel it coming, the first thing I'll do is say, okay, I'm leaning into this discomfort. And then I'll tell someone around me, which takes the power out of it. And that goes for anything advice-wise, mental health-wise, relationship-wise. Whenever you say what you are so fearful to say, it takes the power out of it. And then it takes the power off of controlling you.
That's excellent advice. In fact, that was my next question. Do you have any advice on dealing with anxiety? But you're just saying to just lean into it and talk about it.
I'm a big proponent of therapy. I just think it's so important because I think it is chemical and, mental health. There's a piece of that. But I also think we have our life's journey and we have the struggles that we've been through. And like you said, the lineage of family history. And I think that it's so important to be self-aware.
Yeah.
to be open-minded and to take ownership and responsibility of our own faults.
Yeah, self-awareness is really key in mental wellness because, again, whereas the moment you kind of stop repressing who you were, the anxiety was lifted, right? I mean, not completely, but you were able to kind of like get that burden off because you were able to look at it clearly. I mean, I would think if you're confused or you're pushing things down or you're not really wanting to look at things clearly as they are, it's just going to make you feel more out of control.
You're absolutely right. And the shame feeling is such an unnecessary thing to carry around because you will find your people. And
well, that brings me back to your wonderful, wonderful Facebook post that just was like, like Brene Brown would be so proud of you for just being your authentic self and just coming so forward and just like basically like putting it all out there. It's like as if you were standing on stage naked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's so scary. And I'll go back and find it for you. But I feel like it got the most responses, the most love from the most.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. Was there anybody that like gave you any negative reaction or what happened?
My biggest concern was for my ex and my children. So I waited until I was really ready. It wasn't right when it happened. I think it was a year later. So I took time to really process what I wanted to say. And when I said it, it was my true heart on the line. And I didn't receive any negative responses, but I did have some people slip away in my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that. I think
then they weren't meant to be in your life, really, right?
Because I've attracted so many amazing new people. Like,
right.
You think, at a certain stage in your life, you're not going to meet any new people. But if you put yourself out there and you exude interest and joy and, in subjects or other people, there are like-minded people that you will attract like-minded people. And I do believe also in, the manifestation of things and dreaming about what I want my life to be and what I want to do. And I believe that if you really put that full-heartedly and at the same time put goodness out there, you just always have to put good stuff out there. Good stuff will come back to you.
I agree. The law of attraction, right? Like positive begets positive. Absolutely. Okay, so you're no longer the girl with the pearls, but you still wear dresses and heels and scarves and you're still keeping your parties very colorful. I would say you've just become bolder.
Oh.
So if you could write your younger 20-year-old self a love letter, what would it say?
It's an interesting question because I want to let people know who are listening to this podcast that even though I had to struggle to where I am, to be where I am talking to you today, I don't regret the paths that I took. I'm so happy that I had the time I did at each stage in my life. So I don't want to go back and say you should have,
Right.
But if I went back, I would say to myself, be gentle with yourself. My therapist has always said, talk to yourself like you would talk to your daughter.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Got a good therapist.
Oh, she's amazing. We've been together for a while. And I really don't think you can ever stop learning. I don't think you finish therapy and think, okay, I'm fixed. Like, I think you can go forever. But I believe that being gentle and kind to yourself goes further than being hard on yourself. I believe in embracing what's different and taking those roads less traveled. Just because other people aren't taking those roads doesn't mean that they're not exciting and meant for you.
I love that. So you would have told yourself to be gentle because it sounds like maybe you were hard on yourself for many years.
A lot of anxiety people are hard on themselves.
Right.
People with mental illness challenges, I think, can be very hard on themselves because they feel different and isolated and not normal. I can't tell you how many times I've asked my therapist, is this normal?
Right.
Now I know.
But the truth is, what's normal, really? I mean, there's no such thing as normal.
Right. And I have to tell you now, I have so much more freedom because I don't expect anything from life. I don't expect that there's any formula that makes perfect happiness. I don't know that anything is for certain. So I enjoy things because I love them and I don't expect things to be there for me. I am in control now. I just want to say it's very freeing for someone who has anxiety because you're trying to put yourself in a box. But the bottom line is if you let go and you realize that anything can happen in your life, it's so much more freeing.
Right. And to also just kind of be in the moment and enjoy those freeing times. So that's a perfect segue to my last question. Do you have any happiness habits? Anything you do that brings you a lot of joy?
One thing I will tell you is that I am constantly trying to challenge myself, even if it feels uncomfortable, because I know that I will feel stronger afterwards and in turn happier and freer. So for example, in August, I'm going to Paris by myself and I've never done anything like that before and I'm nervous. But I know that I'm going to have a rich experience and that I'm going to figure it out and that nothing's going to be perfect about it. There'll be good moments and bad moments. But when I come home, I will be a better person for it. I was on the Santa Monica Pier with my girlfriend last week and her son, and we decided to ride the roller coaster, which is something I would never do. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to scream. And I came off laughing hysterically because I had challenged myself and I did it. So I think we're so much more stronger than we think. And to lean into those challenges makes me a happy person because I feel proud and I'm not denying myself of experiences just because I feel scared. So that's one thing I would recommend. And then gratitude, which I know sounds so cliche, but I went to my rabbi once at Valley Shalom in Encino, Rabbi Feinstein. And I told him, this is a little off subject, but I told him that I was having trouble finding spirituality and finding God. This was probably 10 years ago when I was struggling. And he said that a higher power can be found in gratitude. And you should take every moment you can to smell your children when they come out of the bathtub, or, the normal things, making breakfast in the morning, a hot cup of coffee, taking a walk, all of these normal things, all of these are pieces of what makes up a greater universe, a greater power.
Yeah, well, God is in the details, right? And so to notice those details. And as a party planner,
oh my gosh,
you definitely notice those details.
I know. And I will tell you one thing that someone told me once is that as a creative, which also used to be a weird thing to be, it was much more practical to be a lawyer or a doctor or something, steady. But creativity is celebrated in 2019, especially in Los Angeles. It's a town of creatives. So I feel like I'm settling into that and enjoying that. And also when I talk about taking risks like Paris or the roller coaster, I also take risks in my business because it makes me a better business person. I don't want to live in fear. But creativity is linked to being free as well. Like you can't be creative when you're all locked up in that box, trying to be what you're supposed to be. So since I have come into my own and been my authentic person and been free in that way, my creativity is flourishing. And I never believed that there was a link like that. But when you are free in that mental way, not limiting yourself, your creative spirit just blossoms.
Yeah, that's a really interesting parallel, right? Like, anxiety is about control. And the moment that you feel free to not have to control your surroundings, you can let your creativity flow.
And it does. And I love the people I work with, the clients, my team, in my company that I've hired. And again, with the manifestation, just visualizing what I want to be, what I'm striving to be. And with my philosophy of putting good out into the world, helping those in my business when they need help, expecting nothing in return, raising up the people around me, especially female-owned businesses. I'm so happy to support small businesses and, people like me who are just trying to make it. And I think that I'm going to keep going in that direction. And I love modeling for my girls who I'm able to become.
So tell the listeners where they can find you.
Okay, for any and all party needs,
Yes.
You can find me at partycrushevents.com. That's my website.
I'll have the link in my show notes. Great.
Okay. And Instagram, and follow along with my stories. Like Rachel said, I talk a lot.
And I'll have those also linked. You have got to watch her stories. And I can't wait to see your stories in Paris. That's going to be so much fun.
Oh my gosh. I'm doing like the little found hidden gems in Paris instead of the big ones. I'll do a few of the big things, but I've been researching like where to take a life drawing class or where to bake a baguette or, just really trying to immerse
how
myself.
fun. So we're going to feel like we're with you. That's great.
Absolutely. Come with.
I'm going to come with.
Okay.
Well, Jessica, this has been so good. I'm so grateful. And I'm really just proud of you, truly, for coming forward. And as we've said, living your authentic life and being bold and colorful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. And thank you for all you're doing in your podcast to bring awareness.
Of course.
My 12-year-old me would have loved to have listened to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I can't wait to see you soon, but I'll see you on Instagram.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, honey. Thank you. I want to thank Benjamin King for his heartfelt intro to Dear Family, as well as for helping me produce this podcast. And thank you to Ari Silverman, our composer. This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions or comments, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing Dear Family. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.